Hey everyone, Matt here. Just a note on this podcast episode. I refer to Paul Walker as Scott Walker probably every time I use his first name. And I don't know where this came from that I think Paul Walker's name is Scott Walker. It probably dates back to as long as I've known of him as an actor. And if you've been following the podcast or my blog, I tend to get names wrong. Usually I have a co-host or a guest who corrects me on it, but me doing a solo podcast this time, there was no one there to do that. So just a note as you're listening that you're going to hear Paul Walker or you're going to hear Scott Walker. I did it again. You're going to hear Scott Walker when it should be Paul Walker. As we go on further in this series of Fast and Furious movies, I'll do my best to correct it, but I actually can't promise anything because this has been hardwired for like maybe 20 years now, but I'm going to do my best. So just keep that in mind, and I apologize for kind of making that mistake, but hopefully otherwise you'll enjoy the podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I know this is probably a little bit changed, right? This is the off Tuesday from our usual bi-weekly or fortnightly cadence that we usually have for podcast episodes, and I'm here by myself. So I've been trying to figure out what to do with these off Tuesdays, right, when I don't post. Like normally the way it works is that on a Tuesday night, maybe I'll post the podcast episode every other Tuesday night, usually do the social for it on Wednesday. But then these other Tuesdays, right? So there's always two Tuesdays a month where there's a podcast and 2 Tuesdays that I don't have anything, right? I don't have any content. I've been trying to figure out content that I can fill in those spots. And I've had certain ideas like maybe doing sort of indie screener reviews, which I just don't always get around to like I should. Maybe doing letterbox lists, all kinds of things like that. And one idea that I'd had was doing maybe my own solo podcast series, off the normal cadence, where I kind of cover something that's not necessarily DTV. And the original idea I had was to do the John Wick movies, because I watched the 3 John Wick movies, the first 3, kind of all within a weekend. This was well before the 4th one was coming out. So we knew the 4th one was on its way, but it was months before it was going to be released in the theater. And I was going to put out a podcast where I talk about those first 3 John Wick movies. Just never got around to it. Now the 4th one's coming out, or the 4th one's out, I should say. The 4th one's out. And it just seemed weird to be talking about the first 3 without talking about the 4th one and not having seen it. Of course, the problem is, as you know, the movie's 3 hours long, and beyond the fact that I have issues with run times, right? Like I want a movie to be like a good 90 minutes. I can do a 3-hour movie, but I can't do a 3-hour movie in the theater without an intermission. I need an intermission in there to kind of break the film up a little bit for me, not have to sit for that long. I know when I did The Irishman, it was nice. I think I broke it up into 3 parts, or maybe even more than that, but I would stop it and kind of get up, go get myself some food, whatever, get up from sitting. One movie, my friend and I did Lawrence of Arabia a few years ago when that was being shown on theaters for, I don't know if it was an anniversary or something like that. And that has an intermission. And pro move on my friend's part, we got the largest soda and the largest popcorn. And the largest soda had a free refill. So during the intermission, neither of us had finished our sodas. I had about a little bit more than half of my soda left, and he was about the same. He dumped his soda and got the free refill when I didn't do that. I was like, I got plenty of soda left. I don't need to do that. And I was out before the end of the movie, and I was suffering a little bit, whereas he was in really good shape. So with these movies getting longer, right? And I mean, for whatever reason, John Wick is close to 3 hours long. I don't know why the John Wick 4 is close to 3 hours long. I don't know why it needs to be that long. But these Marvel movies, the most recent Batman movie is 3 hours long. If movies are going to be this long again, we need to bring back the intermission. And if we do bring back the intermission, follow my buddy's lead, get the largest soda, dump whatever you've got left during the intermission, get the free refill. You're going to be good to go as the movie goes on. But anyway, so again, coming back to what I wanted to do with this other Tuesday thing, while I was waiting for John Wick to come out and stream, I was like, well, what are some other movie series that I could look at? And one idea was the Star Wars, starting beginning to end with the Star Wars. So I did like, the Phantom Menace. I watched Attack of the Clones, and I was going to do those Clone Wars cartoons. And I did the early 2000s ones that were on the Cartoon Network. There was like a series of shorts that they combined into 2 movies. And those are on Disney Plus in the Legends section. So I guess the Legends section is where it's not official Lucas canon, but that's, the movies are there. Anyway, so I watched those, and then I was going to start watching the Clone Wars cartoons that are like kind of like the 3D animation ones. And I just kind of midway, after like 3 or 4 of them, I just kind of like, I don't know, maybe I've gotten to 8. I don't know how many I've gotten through, but I'm just kind of like crapped out and just like can't keep going. I think the problem is I don't think Anakin Skywalker is a compelling hero. I think that's probably the issue for me, is that he just seems like a snotty brat than more than like a hero. And so it just doesn't work for me. So I don't know, maybe I'll cut off those Clone Wars cartoons and go right into the third movie and kind of go from there. Maybe that's what I'll do. But anyway, I needed, I was thinking about what is a series of movies I could do. And the Fast and the Furious ones came up, and I was like, wow, actually, all of them are available to stream free. Now, I've seen all of them except for Part 3, the Tokyo Drift one, and then the most recent one that isn't out in the theater, number 9. I hadn't seen that one yet. But the ones that are available to stream, what's interesting is, even though I've already seen them before, right now they're available, I think, on TNT, which means they're like edited. It's like almost like a made-for-TV version that's in on demand. And that's actually not so bad if I've already seen them before to view them in a free way like that. And I was like, okay, well, this might be a good one to do this podcast series with. It might be a good place to start. And then there's other ones out there, like the Mission Impossible movies, for example. All 6 of those are available on Paramount Plus, which we subscribe to. So that could be one that I do in the future. When John Wick 4 finally comes out, that might be one to do. The Predator films, I had recorded a solo podcast on Prey after I saw that, and I just didn't like how it sounded. I didn't like the way I was going over things, and I thought maybe I'll try it again or come back to it, and I just haven't come back to it yet. But that might be another one, right? The Predator movies, that could be a good series to do. So we'll see. We'll kind of see how people respond to this, what people think. So, I mean, of course, as always, let me know. Facebook, Twitter, the email is dtvconnoisseur@yahoo.com. Let me know what you think, like what you'd like to see me cover, that kind of thing. If you like the idea of this sort of off fortnightly cadence, right? So we've got the common, the fortnightly cadence of the actual podcast that we come out, where we've got guests, and I've got a couple already in the can that I'll be ready to be posting on. I guess that would be the 18th and 29th. Or I'm trying to think what those dates are that we did the most recent one. So we did the second, so it'd be the 16th and 30th, I guess, would be when we would be getting new podcasts out. Those are already in the can, ready to be posted. But then, putting something in between those weeks, maybe me recording myself talking about some. And I thought with the Fast and the Furious, I would do like 1, 2, and 3 this episode, then 4 and 5 the next one, 6 and 7, and then 8 in Hobbs and Shaw, and then 9 and hopefully see number 10 in the theater, and do those ones. So we'll kind of see how that goes. Also, the hope is to do it each off week podcast, off Tuesday week. We'll see if that happens. It may be, I don't want it to be like a monthly thing. I want it to be kind of fortnightly, the way the podcast is, but we'll see if I'm able to keep to that. As always, that's kind of how it is. But by all means, always appreciate the feedback. Now, before we get stuck in here with these 3 Fast and Furious movies, I do want to give a quick shout out to Rich Haas at DTV Digest. He made a really great comment on the Mercenary for Justice podcast post that I had on Facebook. And we talked about what he liked about the episode. And it led to us getting some more streams and or more downloads, or however. And so I want to thank him for that. Really appreciate him taking the time to make that comment and kind of let us know. But I think it led to other people wanting to listen. If you're not subscribed to the DTV Digest, you should on iTunes, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcatcher is. Really great show. So Rich, along with host Mike Parkin and fellow podcaster Stephen Lockridge, they kind of go over the DTV market in England and what films are coming out. They usually do like 3 or 4 per episode. They're total cinephiles, really love movies, really love talking about movies, but also they really love the independent spirit of DTV, and that really comes through in the way they talk about the films. And so, if you're not subscribed to those guys, you should be checking them out every week. Also, you should be following Rich on Twitter. One of the other things they do short films on their podcast. DTV Shorts, and that's a Twitter you should follow because he's always getting the word out about short films. So again, really, really great way to support indie creators. Excellent. And again, as always, I appreciate all the support that we get for the podcast, for the blog, on Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Even just hitting that like button. Even if it's just that sort of just that act of clicking the like button, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook, is huge because it extends it in the algorithm, right? Not just with your own feed, right? So if you like each direct-to-video connoisseur post on Facebook or Twitter, you're more likely to see my next posts in your feed, right? So it always helps in that sense. It also boosts it on other people who follow us on social media, so it's going to be more likely to be in their feeds. But then also your friends and people that you're following or your mutuals with, they're going to see it on their feed as well. It might help grow us. So yes, it's great if you've got the money to be able to buy my novels. I always love that. And one thing to keep in mind with those novels is if you buy them on Kindle, get the digital version for $5, I get roughly the same royalty as I would get if you spend $13 on the paperback. So, even just that $5 is huge for me, buying the book. So I always appreciate that. Always appreciate someone like Rich going on and talking about why he likes the episode and what he really dug about it, which, sort of generates more interest from people that they're like, hey, okay, I want to check that out too. But even just the liking, the retweeting, the sharing, just commenting saying like, I love this movie, that kind of thing, all really, really huge. And I always appreciate all of it. And so, yeah, thank you for all the support. And again, if I am putting out content that you're not a big fan of, let me know as well. So you can send me a message on Facebook, send me a message on Twitter, the email, dtvconnoisseur@yahoo.com. All really great. And, I'm always happy to take the feedback and see like what are some things that we could change about what we're doing to kind of make it a little more friendly, kind of get content out there that you're looking for. So absolutely. But again, thank everybody thank everybody out there for the support that you've been giving us. All right, so we're going to take a quick break and then we'll get stuck in on a little Fast and Furious.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the podcast in a second, but first I have a new novel out, Holtman Arms. It follows Colvin Hall, an aspiring writer who decides to write a romance novel on a whim, sends it to a publisher, and it becomes a huge success. The only problem is, no one knows it's him because he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. With all of the money and none of the fame, Colvin longs for the world to recognize his accomplishments. When he gets an opportunity to write a freelance article on a washed-up 90s pop star looking for a comeback, that recognition starts to come, but is it all he hoped for? It doesn't matter because he's getting it whether he likes it or not. Holtman Arms is the second in my author's cycle after A Girl and a Gun, and like that previous novel, it explores themes of success and accomplishment in the 21st century. You can buy it now through Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. The link is in the podcast description. As always, thanks for your support.
All right, we are back, and we're going to talk about Fast and Furious 1, Too Fast, Too Furious, and then, of course, Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift here as we start this sort of series about the Fast and the Furious movies. Starting with the first one, right? I first saw the Fast and the Furious in 2001, around the time it came out. I was a fifth-year senior in college. It took me 5 years to get my undergraduate degree. And I was still living in the dorm in that time, just because it just was easier to be in the dorm, and I had friends in the dorm. But they were freshmen in the dorm, of course, right? And they were like, you got to check out this Fast and the Furious movie. And I watched it, and I was like, oh, this is ripping off Point Break. They didn't know what Point Break was, right? It's kind of crazy to think they were, maybe they were 5 years younger than me, and they hadn't heard of Point Break, hadn't seen it, didn't know what it was. So it was interesting to think of just that part of it, that like they were seeing the Fast and the Furious, and they were thinking of this concept as a sui generis, right? That it was its own thing as opposed to being a remake of a film that came out in the early 90s. And for me, of course, what I liked about the film was Vin Diesel. I was a huge Vin Diesel fan at that time, and I think we all were, right? Vin Diesel was like this big deal. We'd seen him in Saving Private Ryan, and then you get, Boiler Room, you get this film, you get Pitch Black, you get Triple X, and he was just this larger-than-life guy that we just all loved. And one of the interesting things about this movie, I think the big thing for me about this movie is that the Vin Diesel factor almost sort of mitigated the fact that for me, it was a ripoff of Point Break, and two, there was a huge douche chill factor, which I don't know if you're familiar with the term douche chill. I know a radio show I listened to out of Boston, Felger and Maz, the radio host guy, or the update guy, Jim Murray, he uses the term douche chill a lot. And it's essentially when somebody does something so douchey, or they're just douchey in general in a way that gives you chills. That's probably the best way to think of it. And the movie does. I mean, granted, like Matt Schultz's character is meant to be a douche chill character, right? You're supposed to get douche chills from him, but I think even just some of the other characters, like Johnny Strong's Leon character, where he's like, "Hey, pizza boy, go find another route," and you're like, ugh, like this kind of gives me a chill. Like it's kind of just douchey. I thought maybe that element of the film would have died down over time, that there'd might be more nostalgia associated with the film. And it actually wasn't the case. That actually it was the douche chill factor was still there. The other thing too is that actually some of the other elements of the film didn't age as well. So for example, Ja Rule doesn't age as well, right? Because of the whole Fyre Fest thing. And it's interesting because he had a song at the end of the, in the credits, or playing the credits, and I listened to him rap, and it's like, wow, you forget how talented he was in the early 2000s. Like he was one of the best, one of the top rappers at that time, and it was well deserved. Like he definitely had that level of talent. Whereas now we just see him as the Fyre Fest guy, right? And of course, there's also that viral video of when he performed at a Bucks game where it was like '90s night and they had him perform, and he's like, "Hey, I had my first album came out in the 2000s, but that's all right, I'll perform anyway," And so it's kind of just degenerated into this whole where would I be without my baby kind of thing, right? That's just kind of what we all remember of him as. But he actually was a talented rapper. But anyway, seeing him in the film, driving the cars, it didn't age as well as you'd think. Vin Diesel doesn't age as well either, and I think part of that is from us. There's a recent during my the main podcast, right? Been working with Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and New Horror Express. He's been wanting to cover some of these, or wanted to get into talking about more of these Seagal DTV flicks. And there's almost a Seagal element to Vin Diesel in these movies, where Vin Diesel is perfect. Vin Diesel is the best, and he can't lose. He's always winning. He's always beating everybody up, and he's always the strongest, the best driver, the best everything, the coolest, all of that stuff. And it works better with Vin Diesel, I think, than it does with Seagal, but it still has a tinge of that. And I could feel that tinge when I was watching this movie, so that didn't age well either. I think there's also just the fact of what the original Point Break represents and how this movie sort of divorces itself from that. I mean, the original Point Break, right, it's made by Catherine Bigelow, and there's a heavy element in it of, as her as a woman trying to get into the world of directing, there's a heavy message in there of like, as a woman trying to get into the world of directing, it's not smart to play the men's game, right? If you're trying to play by their rules, you're trying to do trying to essentially be a man in the men's game, they're always going to see you as a woman, and it's never going to work out. And the best example of that, of course, is Tyler, right? Lori Petty's Tyler character. I mean, she has a name that is, you could say gender neutral, but I mean, we think of Tyler as being more of a guy's name than a girl's name. So she has the name Tyler, right? So she has short hair, kind of more like as a guy would have short hair. She surfs with the guys. She's not just being pretty on the beach and watching them. She plays football with the guys. Again, not just being pretty on the beach at the party and watching them. But ultimately, as much as she wants to be one of the guys, ultimately she ends up bound and gagged in her underwear, being held at knife point, hoping Keanu Reeves will rescue her. And that's kind of the message I felt from that movie from Bigelow, is that, like, listen, just you can't play the men's game because they're ultimately going to see you as a woman. And it's up to you to kind of play by your own rules or create your own game. And she does that. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is that we think of sort of the objectification of women in action films, just sort of how it works. And she does this kind of unique reverse objectification of the men, where it's like, it's not like she's just like saying like, okay, I'm going to have Keanu Reeves in a wet t-shirt, right, when he's like doing his training. But it's almost like this sense of like, men are full of shit, but we love them anyway, kind of thing. It's almost like this sense of like, for all their flaws, there's so many things that we like about guys too. And it's sort of like taking men as a whole. And it's this thing that she does in a lot of her movies, right? When you see the kind of the male characters in those movies, whether it's Jeremy Renner, Ralph Fiennes, it's kind of a theme that goes through them that I always kind of appreciate, and I really appreciated about Point Break. Now you could make the point, right, that because the way that they handle the Tyler character in Fast and the Furious is they divide her into two characters, right? So you've got Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez, who's the woman who wants to be one of the guys, right? She just wants to be one of the guys. And then you've got, Mia, right, Jordana Brewster's character, who's the sister, right, who's the love interest for Scott Walker's character. So and obviously in Point Break, Tyler plays both. She's the one who wants to be one of the guys, but is also the love interest. And you could make the case because neither of those characters end up being damsels in distress in this movie. Neither of them get treated that way. And of course, Michelle Rodriguez's character, right? She is always has agency. She's always, there's never a point where it's like, oh, she's just trying to be one of the guys, but she's not one of the guys, right? Or like that she's not a competent racer and she doesn't deserve her spot where she is. So you could make the case that, right, like that, however many years later, 15 years, 17 years later, whatever it is, almost 20 years later, sorry, almost 10 years later. I'm like way off my age. Like, yeah, 10 years later, you could make the case that that in some ways that Fast and Furious is more progressive on that element, right? That the women are equals, no matter how much there's like the sort of the eye candy element to it. There's there, but I guess there's still not that message, right? There are really no messages in Fast and the Furious, right? It's really just a straight ahead actioner. There's a meathead quality to it, which again, or a douche chill quality to it, but overall, there's that. I think of some of the other areas where this dovetails, of course, with Point Break. You have the Rick Yoon group, right? They're supposed to be Rick Yoon is supposed to be our Vincent Clinton, right? They're the rival gang who has they're erroneously busted, right? When really, like as what the actor's name, I can't, Ted Levine, right? His character when he tells Scott Walker, it was Toretto the whole time, you just didn't want to admit it. It's kind of the same thing where Busey knows that it's Patrick Swayze's gang, right? But Keanu Reeves didn't want to admit that, right? But Rick Yoon's gang is not as cool as Vincent Clinton with Anthony Kiedis, and of course Tom Sizemore undercover, drinking, eating cereal by pouring beer over it. Then he goes and confronts them in the police station after the bad bust. He's like, "Do you think I like this hair, man?" Just all of that is just so much better in Point Break, right? Than it is in Fast and Furious. But I think not comparing it to Point Break, looking at it on its own merits as a film. I mean, I don't know if it's I think it's a solid actioner, right? I mean, the car chases work. I think that's probably the biggest thing. The car chases and the races, they work, and they work at a level that makes this a solid actioner. And again, the tropes that you usually see in action films, like the damsel in distress and that kind of thing, they aren't in here. It's really just about just this crew going out and doing, and Scott Walker trying to bring them down and then almost like, I don't know, like even the way they handle the whole, I don't know if the term going native, I think it's what they called it in Miami Vice, right? When was it I can't think of his name, the guy from Married with Children, right? When he's undercover in the first season of Miami Vice, and they don't know if he's gone under, if he's like just one of those, it's kind of the same idea, right? And Keanu Reeves kind of the same thing, right? He kind of likes the guys more than he's supposed to. And Ed O'Neill, right? I don't know if you remember, if you've ever seen that episode of Miami Vice, he's really good. And I think it's in the first season of Miami Vice. Ed O'Neill plays an undercover cop who he goes missing, and they wonder if he's actually like in with the gang, that he's, if he's gone, it turned into a criminal like the rest of them. And so it's kind of that same vibe, right, that you get here, where it's like, okay, Scott Walker's got to make that decision about what to do with Vin Diesel, but like unlike Keanu Reeves, who lets Swayze kill himself, right? Scott Walker's letting him escape, so it's a little bit different dynamic there. But I think as a straight ahead actioner, I don't know if I would call this the Phantom Menace out of the group. Like, I don't know if it's that bad of a movie. I mean, I still am not, Phantom Menace really just doesn't work for me on a lot of levels. This works for me on some levels. And I think, again, it's always going to be hard for it to step outside of the shadow of Point Break, of the original Point Break, the movie that it mimics. But I think also, too, the fact that they had to remake Point Break tells you that, one, how much this movie has kind of created its own thing, right? This whole series has been, has created its own, it's sort of stepped out from the shadow of Point Break, and obviously how big the franchise is now, that people felt like they needed to make a Point Break. I think if you were going to remake Point Break, if you're going to reboot Point Break, I'd rather it done this way than to have a movie that has the name Point Break associated with it, with characters that are supposed to be reminiscent of those characters, I prefer this kind of a reboot or remake, and to that extent, I think this works enough for me. Getting the douche chill factor aside, right? It kind of just does enough for me. So, yeah. So that's kind of the first one. And again, this was probably the one I'd seen the most out of all the Fast and the Furious movies. I was a huge Vin Diesel fan in the early 2000s. I was like, I got to buy up all of his stuff. I'm not so much now, but at the time, I think it was one of those things where he started off really cool, and then as it kind of went on, you're like, Babylon AD, some of this stuff. It was kind of more. I mean, Chronicles of Riddick. I remember my friends and I watching Chronicles of Riddick, and just the lines in that were just so fantastic. There's the one where they're escaping the prison, and the guy's like, "Are you trying to escape?" And he goes, "When it happens, it'll happen fast. Stay on my leg when I cut fence or die here." And that was one of my buddies and I, when we were to be hiking, if like one of my friends, Mark, who's like kind of big into hiking, he could move quickly. And he would joke about that, like, stay on my leg when I cut fence or die here. Because he'd start moving, it's like you got to keep up with him. And I think that's kind of the thing, right? Is that the Vin Diesel thing, it kind of moves. And as we kind of go into these other two films, right? Vin Diesel was so big at that time that he wouldn't have done a Fast and Furious sequel. Or I guess he had other things going on maybe that he wouldn't have been able to be in a Fast and Furious sequel. I'm not sure. But it made sense that he wasn't in the other movies because he was big enough at that time. And as we'll see, right, he kind of starts to drop a bit as we all kind of get a kick out of the act. And as we get into the more of the Fast and Furious movies, it's almost like, if you look at his IMDb bio, it's all Fast and Furious movies or doing the voice of Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy. All right, so let's get into Too Fast, Too Furious. So I saw this one around the same time it came out. I didn't see it in the theater, but I did rent it. Or I think I may have even owned it on DVD. And I watched it like once and didn't really care for it. And so when I was going to do this rewatch of the Fast and Furious movies, I was not looking forward to going over this one. Because I remember having this bad sense of not really enjoying it. And I think part of it was because I just liked Vin Diesel so much that he wasn't in it, and so it didn't work for me. Actually watching it again, seeing it on the second rewatch, I actually like it better than the first one. I think the biggest piece is Scott Walker really steps out, right? He gets to really be the star of the film, and he does a great job. But also the chemistry between him and Tyrese is really fantastic. It's like a very good, like almost like a buddy cop kind of feel to it. But they play off each other really well. It's really fun actioner in that sense. The two of them are just, think about like Bad Boys or something like that. But I actually like this better than that kind of a movie. Like that it's just a really great time. Some of the other things I didn't like about it, I wasn't a big Cole Hauser fan. I'm okay with him as the baddie now, so that kind of works a little bit better. Again, I think as I'm leaning into more of the Tyrese and Scott Walker buddy piece, that kind of, it makes it a little bit easier to handle the villain, right? Because you want the villain to be equally bad, And I think I thought he was more of a cheeseball villain than a bad villain, but no, I think it worked. So there's that there. Eva Mendes, of course, she was big at that time. I remember her being in the Ghost Rider movie and some other stuff at that time. She's really good as, interesting because there is that damsel in distress element with her, right? Where they have to rescue her at the very end from Cole Hauser. But it's so quick, right? It's almost like a 10-minute thing. For the most part, she's kind of taking care of business on her own, undercover, kind of helping them out. Ludacris was really good. I really appreciated Ludacris in this. And I think, again, like kind of comparing him to Ja Rule, because both of them kind of come up around the same time, right? They're both big at that same time. And it's almost like Ludacris was able to hang on a little bit longer, whereas Ja Rule kind of faded quicker. And I don't know exactly what the reasons were for that, why that happened, but Ludacris has managed to transition better. And that shows in the film when you're watching because he ages a little bit better. I think because Ludacris brings a little bit more from a charisma standpoint and an acting standpoint. Like I think he's just naturally good on screen like that, and it really comes through in that character here. Devin Aoki, who plays the another racer within that group, who's got kind of friends with Ludacris, I really liked her as well as that character. And I think at the time I don't think I quite appreciated what she was bringing from that small scale. So a lot of that really worked, and it's almost like. One thing that was kind of cool about it is like, they pushed that whole family element in the first movie, right? It's all about family. I'm all about family and all that stuff. And what I really liked was that Scott Walker kind of recreates a family kind of on the fly, But there's something more organic about recreating that family than having sort of the douche chill elements of like Matt Schultz's character or Johnny Strong's character in there. These are kind of more fun, interesting people that they have in there together, as opposed to one notes that are just like, hey, road's closed, pizza boy. Like nobody's saying road's closed, pizza boy. That's like the lines are better. So that all worked. And I think there's almost kind of like a missed opportunity here, right? Because unfortunately, Scott Walker's no longer with us. I mean, him and Tyrese were so great together. It would have been great kind of to see the same way that you had the Hobbs and Shaw spinoff. The two of them doing a spinoff together would have been fantastic. I mean, Tyrese, I feel like, is almost wasted in some of these newer ones because of what he brings. He's almost been reduced to almost like this goofy character, whereas here he's goofy but also a solid action lead, especially with Scott Walker. That it was really good. And of course, at that time with Tyrese, his first album that came out, I think it came out like the late 90s. I want to say it's self-titled. It's horrible for me to not remember because this album was a big deal. Let's see if I can look up his albums. Here we go. It was a big one. It was Tyrese. It was just called Tyrese. It came out in 1998. I bought the CD. I was a fan of his music. I mean, R&B singer. He was probably one of the, like for that late 90s period, and he was one more underrated. He didn't get kind of the big run that some of the bigger names were at that time. But that CD was one that got traded around a lot in college. Guys had dates, women coming over. Hey, Matt, can I borrow your Tyrese album? Can I see that? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then it'd be like, oh, I don't have it. So-and-so's got it. You got to go get it from so-and-so. A lot of my friends were setting the mood with Tyrese in the late 90s in college there in the dorms at the University of Maine. So definitely shout out to him for that, right? Thank you for that, Tyrese, that you helped a lot of us. The other thing too is when my buddy Petrowski and I in 2001, we were in San Diego and we went to LA for the day. We were on the Craig Kilborn show, or not on it, I was in the audience for it, I should say. We went to the audience of the Craig Kilborn show, but Tyrese was on. That was what I was trying to say. But Tyrese performed. We got kind of like a really interesting behind the scenes look at how that kind of thing worked. Because Craig Kilborn's set was so small that they had to do the musical act first, even though when the show aired, it would come last. But also, as Tyrese was singing, his microphone cord fell out, and he had to plug it back in while he was performing. And he does it kind of all in one, like he just kind of, without missing a beat, does that. But his agent was like, nope, you got to do it again. We don't want this microphone cord cut thing happening, or, drop thing happening. So he actually performed the song twice. I don't remember what song it was. It was off the album that came out in 2001. 2000 Watts was that album. So I've seen Tyrese. Technically, I've seen him perform live, and to some extent, right, because he was on that show. But yeah, I've been a fan of his music, and seeing him in Too Fast, Too Furious. I mean, of course, he did Baby Boy just before that. And the other thing too, of course, this movie is directed by John Singleton, the late John Singleton, who's a fantastic director, and he did Baby Boy with Tyrese before that. And so that might be part of the reason why this one works a little bit better for me, is that you've got a director of that quality working on the film. Not to say that that other directors that have worked on these aren't, great either. Rob Cohen's the one who did the first one. Not that he's a bad director or anything, but John Singleton was kind of like a, next level, 90s director that, you just think of some of the stuff that he did, that for him to do a movie like this, I thought, it gave it a certain quality that you don't always get from these kinds of movies. So, so there's that piece there that added a little bit to it. And I guess, it's interesting how coming back to this one, however many years later, I liked it better. And, it's funny how you get that one viewing where for whatever reason you weren't a fan. I guess it was because it didn't have Vin Diesel. That was the reason why I wasn't as big a fan. And I guess also the Cole Hauser thing didn't work as much for me. And I don't know, maybe even Scott Walker, I wasn't as big a fan of him as I became. And maybe that's why it didn't work either. But it's funny watching it now where I'm like, no, this whole thing works. This was a fun action movie that I could watch multiple times. And I enjoyed it better than the first one. I wasn't expecting to. So, I think for people who haven't visited this one in a while, check it out. I think you might be surprised on how much you enjoy it. All right, so now we're getting to the last one here, the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, or, I always think of it as Fast and the Furious 3. This is one I hadn't seen before. So I didn't catch it when it first came out. Looks like it came out in the 2006 it came out. And so I didn't catch it then. I was dealing with some health issues at that time and some other things. So I didn't make it to the movie theater as often. So I missed it when it came out. And then I just kept missing it for rentals and everything like that. I just wasn't catching it. And then I was like, okay, now that I'm watching the Fast and Furious movies, is there a way I can see it? And it actually is one of those ones that's available to view for free on my cable system. So I was able to catch it that way and finally watch it and see how it was. And I got to say, this is another one that I enjoyed. I think I liked it more than the first one. I liked, Lucas Black as the hero. He really works. Of course, he was in Sling Blade, which I watched Sling Blade when I went to England on a school trip. It was Virgin Airlines had like TVs on the back of the seats, and at that time they would just show movies. It wasn't like now where you got to pay for everything or whatever. But so I remember watching it that way, and he was in that, so I remember that. But he's he's a cool hero. I enjoyed him in this. I don't think I was so Lil Bow Wow, who's listed as Shad Moss now. I thought I was gonna be more annoyed by him, and I wasn't. He worked well enough. I don't think he's as great as Ludacris or Ja Rule, but he works enough. And then, of course, we have the guy who plays Han, who ends up showing up in the other films here. And it's interesting, the way that they list the cast and crew, they put some of those names way down at the bottom, which is really, so Sung Kang, he's the character, right, in this film. He's kind of the guy who takes our lead character under his wing and kind of shows him the ropes in Tokyo. And, obviously he's a character who comes back in multiple movies. I almost kind of feel like in the later films, kind of the same way that Tyrese is wasted, I feel like Sung Kang is also wasted, because his character in this is really cool. He's the way he kind of knows everything and kind of shows him around and everything and kind of just gets shit done kind of guy. We lose a little bit of that when he's kind of diminished as being a supporting person as opposed to a kind of a more main character. And, he's someone that I think would be really cool to see, again, with kind of thinking about spin-offs. I mean, I think just thinking about these kind of spin-off ideas, we got the Hobbs and Shaw one. Michelle Rodriguez, I think, would be great for spin-offs. And I think kind of going back to that idea of, women in action and sort of the way Catherine Bigelow handled it with Point Break, Michelle Rodriguez is, one of the top women in action. And I think one way that Fast and Furious could really sort of, live up to that sort of the standard that they're trying to set as being a more diverse franchise, a more diverse action franchise, is by just saying, Michelle Rodriguez, you get the next movie, or you just having a Letty picture, I think would be great. But I think, Sung Kang, his Han character would be great in that movie with her. I think the two of them would be great together. But I think even by himself, he would be great. I mean, if they were doing other films along there, and I think that's one of the things of watching this, I was like, boy, yeah, because I knew him, of course. I missed this movie and then watched the other ones, right? So I got to know him before I knew his original film. And I'm like, man, I'd like to see more of him, right? I'd like to see more of what he can do, because he was really great here, and it really worked. Interesting, I think, again, from a story standpoint, it's interesting. This film has a little bit of a damsel in distress element to it. You've got the character of Neela, and who's played by Natalie Kelly, and there's a little bit of that in there, but it's not to the same extent, right, that you would see, again, that's like a normal action movie kind of thing. It's kind of more just about this one guy sort of just trying to make his way, and he kind of gets himself into some trouble with a Yakuza guy, and he's got to kind of get his way out of it, and he just, he races cars and just gets after it. And I don't know, it's kind of fun. I mean, of course, the atmosphere in Tokyo is always going to be cool, right? It's always going to work. That was really good there, too. Sonny Chiba, right, plays, he's like kind of the main Yakuza guy, and it's his nephew is the one that's giving the main character, Sean, trouble. And so seeing him in this, of course, we always love Sonny Chiba, the Street Fighter. He's been on the site a couple times. Anytime we can see him, that's always fantastic. So I was happy to see that. And, I think they could have played up the gangster element a little bit more, but I don't know. I don't think there's anything that happens in this movie where I was like, oh, I wish they'd done more of this or more of that. I think, again, just as a straight-ahead actioner, it's like 100 minutes long, I think, maybe not quite 2 hours. It just hits all the beats that you want from an action film. I mean, yes, there's some of the element of like, oh, he's got to learn how to be a drift racer and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it just again, I don't know why the reason why it took me so long to see it was it wasn't always available streaming. I think this is the one out of all of them that is sort of like the least sort of put out there. It's just not in it much. And one of the and I think part of it is because it doesn't really have anybody in it that we know. You know, of course now it does. Right now it's got Han, who's a big character, and I know Lucas Black's character, Lucas Black's Sean Boswell character. He's been in some of the later films as well. So it's not like it's you know, that this movie isn't part of the canon or something like that. But it just seems like because it doesn't have as many big names in it that it doesn't show up the way that the other ones did. And there was a sense too when this one came out that they were kind of like trading on a name, right? That they were trying to just sort of get one last gasp out there of the Fast and the Furious thing. And I think there was a sense of like, what are they doing? Like this, just put a fork in this thing. And of course, what ends up happening, right, is that we get into the next movie. You know, we get into Fast and Furious, right? That's what they call the fourth movie, is Fast and Furious. That comes out 3 years after this in 2009. And at that point, Vin Diesel had dropped, right? It wasn't working. Of course, he has the appearance in Tokyo Drift, at the end of Tokyo Drift. And there wasn't really a sense when there's an appearance of him in Tokyo Drift that meant he was going to be in the next Fast and Furious movie. But if you look at his career, right, he has some ones that just don't work, right? The Pacifier, Babylon AD, you know, it's kind of like he's starting to fall back. And of course, even just the whole action thing itself and movies themselves, it wasn't working as much for a lot of these guys. And so he comes back and it's like, okay, now they can get him back in a Fast and Furious movie with part 4. But there was a sense with part 3 that like, okay, this thing is dying. This franchise is dying out. This would be the last movie maybe. And they weren't going to maybe make any more. But then of course, like it just worked out that like, okay, you know, Vin Diesel needed work. You know, Scott Walker could go for the movie, and they kind of bring it back. They almost, I don't want to say reboot it, but they kind of start things over again with in '09 with Fast and Furious. So there was a sense too that this movie, I think when it came out, like, what am I supposed to make of this movie? This one that has nobody in it, and so it wasn't like it was a priority for me to watch it. And that's kind of too bad for me because I think watching it now, it was a fun movie. It's a shame it didn't have more buzz when it came out at the time. I think it could have been a bigger deal. I don't know what the box office numbers were for it. I mean, I'm sure it made something. I'm sure, you know, did you know, at that time, like anything, you know, most things made something. So I mean, it did do 62 million, and with a budget of 85 million. So it didn't make its budget back. It did worldwide. It did like 158 million, but in the U.S. it didn't make its budget back until it started going U.S. and Canada rather. So I guess that is that sense that, right, from that sense, it wasn't, you know, a huge success. But it's again, just a fun, straight-ahead actioner. We don't see enough of these kinds of movies in the theater anymore, right? This kind of a movie probably would have been direct-to-video if it was made, you know, 10 years after it was made, right? 2016, this is definitely a direct-to-video thing, whereas at the time, you could push something like this out in the theater. And I do think that's an interesting idea with these, you know, there's so many characters now that are in this, I don't want to call it the Fast and the Furious universe, rather just in the Fast and the Furious series. Like, let's stop talking about verses and universes or whatever. But there's so many of these characters that there's so many things they could do with them that they're just, you know, I think they just kind of touch the surface with the Hobbs and Shaw movie. But, you know, what if they start doing maybe direct-to-video movies? I think it would be cool to do a direct-to-video movie with some of the characters from Tokyo Drift, or do something along the lines of a Tokyo Drift that's direct-to-video. You know, again, I think, you know, we lost Scott Walker, so we can't have movies with him in. But I think, you know, using Tyrese a little bit more. I mean, Tyrese and Ludacris, I think they weren't in the film. They didn't have a lot in the second movie to play off each other, but the chemistry there was really good. Again, you know, Han's character, Sung Kang's character is really great. Michelle Rodriguez's character, we could use more of her. And then, of course, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, The Rock and Statham, it was like they wanted to make their own movie. And so I think it would be interesting to see if Diesel starts to spin this off a little bit more and start doing a little bit more with it. You know, I don't know if miniseries is something to do with it or anything like that. But I think this film, enough has been created now. Enough is there that they could do more. And I think Tokyo Drift might be a really great or a great framework for doing maybe some of the smaller scale films. I think, you know, 100-minute DTV film that maybe gets like a limited release in the theater, but really just like straight to one of the streaming services, like a Hulu or you know, I don't know which one. I think it's maybe HBO Max might be the one to go with for them. I don't know, but one of those services they get it right away. Netflix, whoever. And it goes straight to that service, 100 minutes long, and has enough of the action that we want, enough of the stuff in it that would work, but kind of a smaller scale. Not these huge, massive things where, like, like where we're at now, where we've got these huge stunts and, like, cars smashing all over the place and everything. I mean, this film didn't really have any of that. I mean, it had car flips, it had accidents, it had fights in it, it had shootouts. It was just a nice, straight-ahead actioner. It didn't need all the stuff that these other movies have. Yes, I mean, it's great every couple of years to get a Fast and the Furious movie that has all the stuff in it. But it's interesting to think about this franchise as where it could go. So, interesting. So again, I think Tokyo Drift is another one that I think is more fun. And if you haven't seen it in a while, I think it's worth revisiting, worth checking out. If you've never seen it before, again, same thing, worth checking out. And I think it's a good place to leave it at. That I think, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a series like this before, where you've got 3 movies to start with, right? The first 3 films. And it's not like they build on each other. They're sort of these unique entities within the same framework that are kind of good on their own merits. But it's not like, okay, 1 builds into 2, right? 2 is its own thing and is fun on its own. And 3 is its own thing and fun on its own. So, as we get into from 4 up, they're going to start being kind of building on each other, adding characters that kind of, so it's going to be interesting as we transition into these other films and sort of how those go. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Thank you again for listening. Again, hopefully in 2 weeks, we'll be doing parts 4 and 5 on here. Just some plugs. Since it's just me, I'll plug myself. The dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's the site. That's where you can get everything that you need. So most recent podcast episodes are on there. Links to all of my novels are on there. The site archives. What I've been watching on Letterboxd is on there. Everything's on the site. Also links to social. So DTV Connoisseur on Twitter. I think DTV Connoisseur on Instagram as well. I don't post on Instagram much. I probably should start posting on there again, but I haven't in a while. And then DTV Connoisseur on Facebook. And Facebook is a fun one. There's always there seems to be more engagement on Facebook than anywhere. So if you want to kind of engage with sort of the DTV Connoisseur community, Facebook is the place to go. People really kind of go on there and put comments about the site, stuff like that. So people really aren't commenting on the posts anymore the way that they're commenting on Facebook about the movie. So yeah, if you really want to engage with the DTV Connoisseur community, Facebook is really the place to go for that. And, I'm always happy to have people on there. And, of course, dtvconnoisseur@yahoo.com. That's the email address. The novels, the most recent novel, there'll be a link to that in the description. Holtman Arms. I think, it's the second in my author's cycle series, but you don't have to have bought the one before it, A Girl and a Gun, to know everything that's happening in Holtman Arms. So, but, if you want to start with A Girl and a Gun, that's always a great one as well, too. You could get them both for $10, right? About $5 a piece on Kindle. And of course, the one before that, Chad and Accounting, that was my first novel, one that a lot of people really enjoyed. By all means, check those out. Again, the link to Holtman Arms will be in there, but you can kind of follow that link and go to my author page and, check out any of the novels there. And of course, Threadless, DTV Connoisseur Threadless. That's where you can buy any merch. The thing with merch is a little bit more expensive, so that's why I push the books a little bit more, because it's a way to financially support us that isn't going to hurt your wallet quite to the same extent. I have trouble buying the merch because it's expensive. But you want to buy the merch? John Cross, After Movie Diners, had some really great designs for T-shirts, mugs, all of that stuff. So you want to support his artwork? Go on there and check that out. Or if you want just the regular DTV Connoisseur logo that we've had for 15 plus years now that we've been doing this site. All right, so thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye everyone.